The desert had its own kind of cold. Not the soft, damp cold of the Pacific Northwest where Sergeant First Class Mara Linden had grown up. This cold had teeth. It came off the sand in invisible currents, pulled heat from the skin in long, indifferent draws, and left behind a stillness that felt less like silence and more like something held back. It was 0347 hours. The sky above the Kandahar Basin was the kind of black that precedes color, not dark so much as waiting. Mara lay flat on the ridge, her chest pressed to the stone, her eye behind the scope. Below her, 1,100 meters of open desert. Beyond that, the scattered lights of the compound. Her breathing was slow, 4 counts in, 6 counts out. A rhythm she had maintained for so long it no longer required thought. She had been in this position for 4 hours and 17 minutes. The mission had been simple on paper. Most missions are. Team Echo, 7-9 operators, 2 support assets. 1 intelligence analyst had inserted by ground vehicle at 0100, tasked with extracting a signals intelligence package from a building on the eastern perimeter of the compound. Clean retrieval. No contact. Out before first light. The intelligence package had been there. So had 43 armed men who were not supposed to be. Mara had tracked the first contact from the ridge. She'd watched the mission fracture in real time through her Night Force scope. The initial movement, then the freeze, then the unmistakable geometry of men beginning to run. She had not fired. Her rules of engagement required direct threat confirmation. She had watched, and she had catalogued, and she had reported. Contacts, eastern perimeter. Count is high. Repeat, count is high. Lieutenant Commander Dale Rourke's voice came back. We see it. Moving to exfil route Bravo. Bravo puts you through the drainage channel. I'm seeing movement there too. Copy. We'll push through. Then, 12 minutes later, the sound she had been dreading, the flat crack of small arms fire, echoing up from the valley floor. Then more. Then a lot more. And then, 17 minutes after that, Rourke's voice again, stripped down to its operational core, all of the personal frequency removed. Linden, what's your status? Position Alpha. Sightline's good. I can provide cover if you vector east toward. Negative. We're taking the ridge approach. Move to extraction point, Charlie. She had looked at the ridge approach. She had seen the 3 men already positioned there, waiting. She had reported it. Rourke, I have eyes on the ridge. 3 shooters, 12 o'clock to your axis of movement. They're set up for the approach. A pause. The kind of pause that means a decision is being made. Can you clear them? Negative. Angle's wrong from my position. I'd need to move and I'd lose sight of your. Then we work around them. Another pause. Shorter. Linden, there's a vehicle on your side of the ridge. Enemy. ETA to your position. Approximately 9 minutes. She had processed this. She had known what was coming before he said it. You're exposed up there. If you move now, south along the ridge, you can stay ahead of them. But you cannot come down. You understand? Coming down draws them onto us during exfil. Understood. I'm sorry. And that was how it was done in the dark, in the cold, in the desert, that had its own kind of patience. Then the last thing. The thing she had filed away in a place behind her sternum without examining it. Rourke had switched to the command channel, not realizing, or perhaps not caring, that her earpiece could still receive it. Linden's burned. She can't move south fast enough, and she can't come down. We leave her and move now, or we all go down in that valley. Staff Sergeant Colin Marsh, the team's breacher, said, Sir, I know what I'm saying. She'd make the same call. We leave her. Silence. Then, moving. Mara had heard the crunch of boots on gravel, moving away. She had heard it clearly. She had time to say something, time to argue, to protest, to inject herself back into the conversation. She did not. She pressed her cheek against the stock of her rifle and looked through the scope. Copy, she said. To no one. To the desert. To herself. The word cost nothing. That was the important thing. It cost nothing, and it meant everything was clear, and now she could get to work. First things first. Mara Linden moved quietly to the base of a large sandstone formation 20 meters behind her original position, crouched, and took stock. Water, 1.5 liters. At current exertion levels, in rising temperatures, the desert would go from freezing to 105 degrees Fahrenheit in approximately 5 hours. She had enough for perhaps 4 hours of operational activity. After that, diminishing returns on cognitive function. After that, the body starts to make decisions the mind hasn't approved. Ammunition, 60. 1 rounds of 338 Lapua, 3 magazines, 1 partial. Medical, 2 tourniquets, 1 pressure bandage, a tube of quick clot. The gash on her left forearm from the wire obstacle earlier in the night had stopped bleeding on its own, sealed by the cold. She wrapped it cleanly and moved on. Radio. 1 tactical handset, battery at 61%. She could hear the team channel. She chose not to transmit. Food. Irrelevant. She ran her hands over the rifle by feel, the way she had been doing since she was 19 and the instructor at Fort Bragg had made the class do it. Blindfolded until it was as natural as checking that her own fingers were still attached. Everything functional. Scope clear. She had been told to move south. She had acknowledged the order. She sat with this for approximately 4 seconds. The vehicle on the south slope was real. Her head start was not, in fact, 9 minutes. She had watched the vehicle's lights swing in her direction as she was moving to this position, which meant someone had spotted her thermal signature, which meant the timeline was shorter, which meant south was a trap dressed as an exit. That was one thing. The other thing was the team channel still open in her ear. She had been listening while she conducted her inventory. She had been building a picture. Echo. 7 was moving toward the valley floor via exfil route Bravo. Rourke had been told Bravo was clear. Bravo was not clear. She had seen it herself, the movement in the drainage channel, the shapes in her scope that were too deliberate to be animals, too patient to be locals. They didn't know what was waiting for them. She thought about this without emotion, the way she thought about most things as a system of inputs and outputs, cause and effect, probability and decision trees. It was not a coldness in her. It was a kind of focus. People sometimes mistook one for the other. Mara had grown up in a household that ran on precision. Her father had been an air traffic controller for 22 years, retired to Bellingham, Washington, spent his evenings building ship models in the garage with a concentration that bordered on religious devotion. He did not speak much. He communicated largely through action, the set of a coffee cup in front of you when he thought you needed warming, the way he would sit down across the table when he thought something was wrong, present before a word was spoken. She had his face. She had his way of being quiet. She had used it her entire military career to make people underestimate her, and she had used that underestimation like a tool, precisely, without waste. Now she stood up, checked the ridgeline to the south, confirmed the vehicle's headlights, yes, closer than 9 minutes, and began moving north. Not south. North. Toward the valley. There is a specific kind of decision that soldiers describe as stepping off a cliff in the dark. You know there is ground somewhere below you. You cannot be certain it's close enough to survive. You step anyway because the alternative staying on the edge is its own kind of falling. Mara Linden stepped. She moved along the northern face of the ridge at a low crouch, using the thermal variance between the warm stone and the cool air to break her silhouette. The technique was imperfect. In full daylight it would be useless. In the last hour of full dark it bought her enough. She needed high ground above the valley floor. She needed sight lines down both the Bravo channel and the secondary approach where she had spotted the waiting enemy. She needed it before Echo 7 reached the drainage channel. She calculated 12 minutes. She had, at most, 8. The climb was uneven, technical in places, her left hand protesting where the bandage pulled against the rock. She did not let herself think about the hand. She catalogued the sensation, noted it, set it aside. There would be a time to pay attention to it. That time was not now. She found her position at minute 7. The stone spur jutted out above a natural elbow in the valley, giving her an unobstructed view of 300 degrees. Below her, to the left, the drainage channel that was Bravo. To the right, the secondary approach. Directly below, the valley floor. She settled into a prone position, adjusted for the wind steady, 11 knots, slightly left to right, and ranged the channel. 1,400 meters. 4 men, possibly 5, positioned behind the channel's southern bank, weapons oriented north. The geometry was unmistakable. They expected Echo 7 to come through the gap and were set to take the team in enfilade, catching them exposed in the open stretch. Mara did the math. She had 61 rounds, 4 or 5 contacts in the channel. Others she hadn't confirmed yet. The team at 1,100 to 1,400 meters range, moving. Wind shifting slightly as the pre-dawn thermal gradient built. Her left forearm hurting enough now to matter. She laid her crosshairs on the leftmost contact in the channel and breathed. There was a thing she had tried to explain once, to a journalist who had somehow gotten access to a forward operating base, and who had asked her what it felt like to be a sniper. The journalist had wanted something cinematic. The long pause, the moral weight, the moment of decision. She had told him the truth, which was that at distance, what she felt was nothing she could describe in the language of movies. What she felt was a kind of merger, the self pulling back from itself, the body becoming mechanical in the best possible sense, the mind going clear the way water goes clear when all the sediment has finally settled. She was very still. Below her, she heard the first sounds of the team entering the channel approach. Not much a shift of pebbles, a low voice quickly silenced. But she had been listening to them for 11 months. She knew how they moved. The contacts in the channel began to shift their weapons. Mara exhaled and pressed the trigger. The sound of the shot hit the valley walls and fractured. In the channel below, the leftmost contact went down before the echo had finished traveling. The remaining men scrambled, but they scattered toward the north bank, away from the valley floor, which meant they scattered away from Echo, 7's approach route. Mara was already cycling the bolt. Her second round hit the embankment 18 inches from the second man's head, close enough to suppress, to drive him down. She was not trying to kill him with the second shot. She was trying to create geography to define which directions were dangerous and which were not, to herd the remaining contacts the way a stock dog herds sheep, through the language of velocity and proximity. It took 11 seconds. When the channel mouth was clear, she swept her scope back to the valley floor. On the team channel, she heard voices. Marsh. Sniper. We've got sniper support. A pause. Rourke. Call sign? Silence. She was already moving her scope to the right, to the secondary approach, where 2 more contacts were beginning to shift toward cover. Rourke again. Any unit, confirm call sign. She did not transmit. There was nothing useful to say. The contacts on the secondary approach were behind a rocky berm. She could see one clearly. The other was partially obscured. She ranged the visible 11150 meters and made the adjustments with a focus that occupied all of her available bandwidth. The shot was good. Marsh, on the radio. 2 down, still no call sign. Warrant Officer Denny Fallows, the team's intelligence officer. Pattern. Look at the pattern. Those are suppression shots in the channel. This isn't random. Rourke, who's on the ridge? No one answered. No one who was present, in communication, and authorized to answer could answer, because the only person with that knowledge and those sightlines had been left on the ridge with a last known vector going south. She heard Rourke's voice do something she had never heard it do before in 11 months of operations. It lost a layer. A structural element, some weight-bearing component of professional certainty, dropped away. Linden, he said. He did not say it as a question. He said it the way you say someone's name, when you understand something that you cannot undo. Mara pressed her cheek against the stock and watched the valley through the scope. The team was moving. The sun was thinking about rising. It had not decided yet, but it was thinking about it, a lightning at the absolute eastern edge of the sky, not color yet, just a dilution of the dark, a suggestion of what was coming. Mara had been in position for 41 minutes. She had fired 22 rounds. Her left arm was, quite frankly, becoming a problem. The wound had opened again at some point during the third repositioning and was seeping through the bandage in a way that would eventually require her full attention. Not yet, but eventually. She had moved 3 times to prevent her position from being fixed. This was the fundamental discipline of her work. Stillness for the shot, movement after it. Stay still, you die. Move constantly, you can't shoot. The balance between the two was the job. Below her, Echo, 7 was making progress. She had counted them twice as they moved through the valley floor. 9 operators plus the 2 support assets, 11 bodies, all moving. None carrying anyone, all alive. The team was good. She had always known they were good. What she had spent 11 months trying to understand was whether they knew she was good, and the honest answer had always been, mostly not. She had given them no reason to doubt her on paper. But paper was not the same as knowing, and knowing was not the same as trust, and trust in this environment was not a feeling but a load-bearing structure. She thought about Fallows. The intelligence officer had clocked the pattern. That was interesting. Of the people on the team she had expected to read her work correctly, Fallows would not have been her first guess. He was precise, methodical, the kind of man who experienced the world primarily through data and who could be counted on, in normal conditions, to miss things that were not quantifiable. He had not missed this. She filed that away. The vehicle that had been searching the south ridge had looped north and was now moving along a desert track below her. She watched it through the scope, a technical, 3 men in back, mounted weapon on a pintle, moving slowly, which meant scanning. They hadn't fixed her position, but they had a general area. She checked her ammunition. 39 rounds. She tracked the vehicle. The decision was straightforward. If the vehicle reached the track junction 2 kilometers ahead before Echo, 7 cleared the valley mouth, it would be in a position to engage the team from the rear. That outcome was unacceptable. The vehicle needed to be delayed. Delaying it would cost her 3 or 4 rounds and would absolutely fix her position. She made the calculation and fired once into the vehicle's front right tire at 800 meters. The vehicle swerved, stopped. The men in back scrambled out, oriented toward her position. She was already moving. The exchange over the next 22 minutes was not elegant. It was the kind of combat that does not translate well to debriefs, where the clean narrative of action and reaction dissolves into overlapping probability assessments and micro-decisions made at the speed of muscle memory. She moved and fired and moved again, and behind each movement she was tracking the team's progress in her peripheral awareness the way a musician tracks the beat while playing the melody. Water gone. That happened somewhere in the middle of it. The shaking in her hands, dehydration, blood loss, stress hormones, 40-something hours without sleep, she managed through a technique her first instructor had taught her. She acknowledged the shaking, named it, and then set it aside. You cannot eliminate the body's responses. You can categorize them as information and decide how much authority to give them. She gave them very little. The team was 700 meters from the valley mouth. She pulled back from a rocky spur as rounds struck the stone, moved laterally, found a new angle, and put 2 suppressing shots into a position that was pinning Marsh behind a boulder. She saw him move. She saw him clear. 500 meters. The sky in the east was unmistakably lighter now. Not dawn yet, not quite, but the gray-blue suggestion of it, the early notice. 300 meters. She heard Rourke's voice. We're clear. All elements, we are clear of the valley. Move to extraction, Lima. Extraction, Lima. She knew where that was. She also knew it was 4 kilometers northwest, and she was very far from northwest at the moment, and the men who had been tracking her were close. She took a breath. Then she did what she had been doing this entire time, which was think clearly about what came next. Warrant Officer Denny Fallows would write, in his after-action addendum, that the moment of recognition came not during the shooting but after it. He wrote, "The characteristic pattern was identifiable in retrospect only. At the time, I noted the suppression geometry as tactically sophisticated, specifically the use of near misses to direct rather than eliminate. This is not a common technique. It requires significant confidence in range estimation, wind correction, and target behavioral prediction. In our unit, one shooter demonstrates this methodology consistently during qualifications. He did not write her name in the formal document. He wrote it in the margin in pencil, later, and then erased it. But on the valley floor, as the team moved through the last stretch toward Lima, Fallows had said it plainly on the command channel. It's Linden. No one replied immediately. Marsh said, she was supposed to be. I know where she was supposed to be. Rourke had not spoken. He had been moving, which was the right thing to do, and his silence was the silence of a man processing something at speed, integrating new information into a model of reality that the new information significantly damages. He had made the call. It was the right call, tactically. The calculus had been correct at the time it was made, with the information he had at the time he had it. None of that changed what had happened. None of that changed who was up on that ridge. He tried the radio. Linden. This is Rourke. Respond. Nothing. Linden. We are at Lima. Confirm your status. Nothing. Marsh, quietly. She's still up there. The extraction helicopter was inbound 22 minutes out. Rourke stood at the valley mouth and looked back into the dark and listened to the scattered sound of small arms fire, distant and intermittent, coming from the ridge. He could not go back. Going back would undo everything she had done. It would put more people in the valley, in the light that was now coming fast, in range of the men who were hunting her. She had bought them clear passage. Going back burned that passage. He knew all of this. He stood and listened to the gunfire and knew all of it, and it helped exactly as much as knowing things usually helps when the thing you know is terrible. He stood and waited, and the sky got lighter. Here is what she had left. 12 rounds, 1 bandage, no water, a ridge she knew well enough to move on in near darkness, and a group of 7 armed men who had triangulated her approximate position within a 50-meter radius and were moving to close it. The 50-meter radius would shrink as the light improved. She needed to be gone from the ridge before the light improved. She was not sure she could be gone from the ridge before the light improved, because 3 of the 7 men had cut off the most logical escape route and were waiting for her to take it. She had not taken it. She had gone up instead. Further up, to the true crest of the ridge, where the rock formations were tight and irregular, where a person who knew the terrain could move between cover points in a way that was difficult to predict and trace. She had come up here twice during the pre-mission reconnaissance, alone, in daylight, because the habit of knowing your ground before you needed your ground had been beaten into her so thoroughly that she did it automatically, without being told. That preparation was now buying her approximately 15 minutes of operational viability. She used them carefully. The plan, if it could be called a plan, rather than a series of contingent decisions, each of which depended on the outcomes of the ones before it was to move north along the ridge crest, descend via the secondary route she had identified during reconnaissance, cross the 2 kilometers of open ground to Lima before the light fully broke, and be at the extraction point when the helicopter landed. The complications. The descent was steep. Her left arm was a genuine liability. She had 12 rounds. The open ground was genuinely open, in a way that was survivable in darkness and much less survivable in daylight. She began moving north. The men searching for her were thorough, but they were working reactively. They knew she had been somewhere, not where she was going. This was the fundamental asymmetry that kept her alive in those last minutes on the ridge. She was navigating forward. They were navigating toward a past position. She fired twice more, not at anything she could see clearly, but into the most likely avenue of approach to slow the pursuit. The shots were expensive. She was down to 10 rounds, and she did not know if they hit anything, and she did not stop to determine whether they had. That was not the point of those shots. The point was the sound, the implication, the 2 or 3 seconds of recalculation it would force. She took the descent route. It was exactly as difficult as she had anticipated. Her left hand could not grip reliably. She compensated with her legs, her right hand, and by moving more slowly than she would have liked, which was itself a gamble. Every additional second on the ridge face was an additional second of exposure, as the sky continued its slow announcement. She reached the valley floor with 8 rounds and a forearm that had thoroughly stopped cooperating. The open ground. She moved at a run. At Lima, they heard her before they saw her. Marsh heard it first: footsteps in the gravel, a specific rhythm, someone moving fast and unevenly, favoring one side. He came alert and had his weapon up before the figure resolved out of the gray pre-dawn into something recognizable. He lowered his weapon. "Contact," he said. Just that. No elaboration. She came out of the dark in a straight line toward the extraction point, rifle slung, left arm held slightly away from her body. Her face was drawn dehydration, exhaustion, something compacted and internal that was harder to name. Her uniform was dust-covered, and the bandage on her forearm was brown. She walked past Marsh. She stopped approximately 2 meters from Rourke. She did not say anything. He did not say anything. The two of them stood in the flat gray light, and the silence between them was not comfortable. But it was honest, which was worth more. Then he said, "You need that arm looked at." "I know. The helicopter is." 14 minutes, she said. She had been tracking the inbound transmission. "I know." She turned and walked to a flat rock and sat down and began unwrapping the bandage from her forearm with her right hand. Her movements were careful and measured. She worked without expression. Fallows sat down 2 meters away from her, not close enough to intrude, close enough to be present. After a moment he said, "Channel drainage. The suppression pattern." She looked at him. "That's how I knew," he said. "The way you space them. 3 meters between impacts. Forces lateral movement. You did it at Bragg qualifier too." She looked back at her arm. "You remember that." "I remember things." She pulled a fresh bandage from her kit and began wrapping. The secondary approach. 2 contacts behind the berm. Left one was the priority. He had the angle on your flank. Right one I couldn't fully confirm, but the wound profile would have been non-critical. Fallows was quiet for a moment. "You had all of that in your head the entire time." "I had to." "Someone did." This was not said with bitterness. It was said the way she said most things, flatly, accurately, without decoration. The helicopter sound was building from the northwest, still below the ridge, still invisible. The sky had crossed the threshold from gray to pale blue. The first light was coming. Behind her, she heard the team settling. The sounds of men who have been very close to the edge coming back from it, the particular quality of quiet that is not silence but relief, finding its form. Weapons being slung. Someone exhaling slowly, once, with everything they had. She finished wrapping her arm. The helicopter came in low and fast and set down in a cloud of rotor wash and fine grit. The door opened. Rourke looked at Linden. She stood, walked to the helicopter, stepped through the door first, not because she was taking anything from anyone, there was no theater in it, no statement, but because she was closest to the door, and that was the most efficient sequence of events. The team followed. Marsh, Fallows, Petty Officers Greaves, and Hartman and Chen, Chief Petty Officer Walton, who had a shrapnel laceration across his shoulder that he had bandaged himself and not mentioned. Specialist Torres from the support element. 3 others. All of them. Rourke was last. He stepped in, pulled the door, and the helicopter lifted without ceremony. Inside, the noise of the rotors made conversation largely impossible, which suited the situation. No one tried. They sat in the webbing and stared at the floor or the walls, or closed their eyes, and the helicopter banked north and the desert fell away below them. Mara sat against the forward bulkhead with her arm across her chest and her eyes open. She was thinking about water, about the first cup of coffee she was going to have when they landed, about the report she would have to write, the language she would use, the way the events of the night would be rendered into the flat, sequential grammar of military documentation, about her father, briefly the way he would sit across from her at the kitchen table and be present without requiring anything, the quality of his attention, the ship models with their meticulous rigging. She thought, I'm going to call him. The helicopter flew north in the early morning light, and below them the desert was orange and copper and stretching in every direction, and it looked very different from up here than it had looked from the ridge, less like a place where things had nearly ended, and more like a place that simply was, large and indifferent and continuous, the same as it had been before any of them arrived. The debrief was at 1,100 hours. Mara sat in the third chair from the left and gave her account in the sequential order required by the form. She was accurate and complete. She noted the discrepancy between the reported clearance of exfil route Bravo and the actual situation she had observed. She noted the vehicle timeline. She noted the firing positions, the round count, the final extraction route. She did not characterize any of it. She did not use evaluative language. She presented the events as events. The senior debriefer, a major named Caldwell who had done 2 tours before moving to intelligence, listened without expression and made notes, and asked 3 clarifying questions about the round count and the timing of the first shot. She answered all 3 questions. At the end, he said, SFC Linden, you were given a direct order to move south and maintain radio silence. I was. You did not comply with that order. She looked at him. I moved north instead of south. I maintained radio silence. The order was based on a tactical assessment that I had information to challenge. I exercised judgment. That's one way to describe it. It's the accurate way. Caldwell looked at her for a moment. Then he made a note. Outside, in the corridor, Rourke was waiting. She had expected this. She walked toward him and stopped and waited, because she understood that this conversation needed to happen, and that she was not the one who needed to begin it. He said, the board review will probably call it a judgment call within the zone of discretion. Caldwell's write-up will support that. I know, which means no formal action. I know. He was quiet. The corridor was institutional and empty, the kind of hallway and the kind of building that exists in the middle distances of military installations, serving only its function, no concession to aesthetics, the fluorescent lights doing their minimal work. He said, when you heard the order. She waited. Were you scared? She considered this carefully, with the same attention she gave to everything that deserved accurate treatment. Not of dying, she said. No. What then? She thought about how to say the thing she had not needed to say before, because the thing had not needed saying, because the work had said it instead. I was scared I wouldn't be able to see enough, she said. From that position, scared the angles wouldn't give me what I needed to protect the approach. He nodded slowly. The angles were good, she said. It was the closest she came to anything like satisfaction. He held out his hand. She shook it. The after-action report, when it was finalized, ran to 47 pages. Mara Linden's actions on the ridge occupied a total of 6 lines in the narrative section, referenced in 3 separate places as fire support from an unconfirmed position. The term was technically accurate. The formal commendation which Caldwell drafted, which Rourke signed, which worked its way through the machinery of recognition, was quiet in the way these things are required to be quiet. Marsh read it and told Fallows it sounded like they were describing a piece of equipment. Fallows said, she'd probably prefer it that way. Marsh thought about this. Yeah, he said finally, she probably would. 3 days after the mission, at 0630, Mara was in the range. She had slept 10 hours, eaten 3 full meals, had her arm properly cleaned and sutured, and had spent most of the previous afternoon on the phone with her father in Bellingham. They had talked about the ship model he was working on, a 1:200 scale HMS Victory. He had been working on the standing rigging for 3 weeks, and about whether the weather had been good there. She had told him she was fine. He had said good. They had talked for 45 minutes. Now she was at the range before anyone else. She laid her rifle on the bench and began her pre-fire check, working through the sequence in the order she always worked through it. each step completed fully before moving to the next. The range was quiet. Outside, the light was early and flat, the sky that particular shade of pale that comes before the day declares itself. The door opened. Marsh came in, cup of coffee in each hand. He set one on the bench beside her without asking. He went to the lane, 2 positions down, and began his own setup. They did not speak. After a while, Fallows came in. Then Walton, moving carefully because of his shoulder. Then Torres. Then Greaves. No conversation. No ceremony. Just the click and check of weapons being prepared, the particular quiet of professionals doing something they do every day, the unremarkable morning routine of people who have learned something about each other that cannot be put into words and are therefore putting it into presence. Mara pressed her cheek to the stock. Downrange. The target. She breathed in, breathed out. She pressed the trigger. The shot was good. Outside, the day opened up, flat and bright and indifferent, and the desert held its silence the way the desert holds everything completely, without preference, for as long as it takes. In the operational record, the mission of 14 September is annotated. All elements returned. Nothing else is required.